Hi, everyone. Welcome. We will just wait for a couple of minutes until all of you join, and then we can start officially. Okay, I think we can start slowly, and then people can join us in the meantime. Welcome once again. Thank you for joining Journalists webinar. This time the topic is based on popular vote, because in the last couple of weeks we were asking you about the topics you want to hear us covering, and most of you actually said you want to hear about podcast monetization. So I'm happy that this time I have 3 people who are willing to talk about this topic and who know a lot about it, I would say. So welcome to my guests. I will be introducing them in a minute, but before we start, I would like to remind you that we will be talking to our guests in the first part of the webinar, and then the last part we will leave for your questions. If there are any, we will address them in the end. Please leave your questions down below in the menu, and we will address them, as I said, in the end. So the reason why we're covering podcast monetization is because apparently everyone wants to podcast, and everyone is starting a podcast or already has one. So I would like to talk to my guests about why are podcasts so popular, and especially in the media industry, what does that mean? And is the reason behind every podcast launch the willingness to, or the desire to monetize it, and what are the opportunities for that in the regions that we live in and work in. So before further ado, I would like to welcome Jakub Gornicki. He is a co-founder and reporter from Outriders. It is a Polish media, award-winning media outlet focused on covering global issues. Jakub combines new technologies with journalism, blogging, government accountability, and transparency. He developed numerous initiatives focused on open data and transparency, but today he will be joining us primarily as a journalist, podcast author, media consultant also, and if I might say a creative, who will share with us his experiences when it comes to launching podcasts, hosting ones, but in general with a lot of experience in the media industry. Jakub, welcome.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Next is Jelisaveta Miletic. If you're from Serbia or from the region, you probably know her as one of the team members at Newsnet. It's a satirical online media from Serbia. Jelisaveta joined them in 2018, if I'm not mistaken, where she first started working as a marketing manager, but today I think she has several roles in the team. She's also the co-host of their 2 very successful podcasts, one by the name of News Podcast, right? Yeah. and the second one called Popcast. And she will be sharing with us how they managed to achieve very good success in a relatively short amount of time, I would say. Jelisaveta, welcome.
Hello.
And the last but not least is Ivan Minic. And if you have been using internet at all in the last maybe 2 decades, you've probably come across him and his name. He's also a very successful entrepreneur, but also a podcast author. He has a lot of experience also in business development and working with media organizations, amongst other businesses, let's say. He also founded Burek.com in 2002, which was the largest internet community in the Western Balkans area with more than 2.2 million members, actually. But today, he's also primarily joining us as someone who hosts a podcast, but also has experience in the media industry. Ivan, welcome as well.
Thanks. It's lovely being here.
Thank you. Maybe before we go into the monetization part, I think it might be interesting to give a short, of course, overview of the market. And when we talk about podcasts and the opportunities for growth and monetization, especially in the area we are covering, the Western Balkans, what does the market look like? How big is that market? How many podcasts are there? How many media organizations are actually having podcasts? And do we actually have any statistics about it? If I have proper information, there hasn't been done a valuable actually research on the topic. And actually, if you in the next couple of days go to the website podcast.rs, you will be able to join the first research of this matter in the region. So maybe even if you can, we can hear a short introduction from you on this topic.
The regional scene is quite interesting, and since most people speak the same language or at least understand each other, many things have been developing outside of their native country in the beginning. So, for example, Agela's podcast hosted by Galeb Nikacic is also quite popular in Croatia as well, and in Bosnia and so on. The thing is, it all started actually quite a long time ago because regional media outlet called B92 started offering their some of their shows as audio on demand on their website almost like 15 years ago. Back then, the internet was slow enough so that it's virtually impossible to consume video content on demand, but for audio it was possible. So it all started there. Some of the shows have been distributed that way for a couple of years. They also started the, let's say, blog revolution back in the days by creating their own blog platform with many uh, local celebrities writing there. And the story of podcasts is quite similar to the story of blogs, but with, let's say, 1 decade between them. The situation with podcasts was that up until 3 years ago, 2.5 years ago, up until COVID, actually, it was an underground format consumed by some, usually consumed by listening to popular global podcast authors. There were very few local podcasts on the scene. Some were active in different areas. For example, even then there were a couple of business podcasts that were active, especially Surove Strasti in Croatia. Other than that, what started to develop were pioneering attempts in field of culture, especially music, because it somehow made sense. It seemed like a natural segue to go into that direction. And also there were some sport podcasts as well, which were not gathering too many listeners. It was, let's say, unnatural for people. That was their feedback back then, to just listen to the conversation and not be able to see people talking to each other. Why was that the case back then? We did a small research, and the reason was simply the fact that even though radio was still active and popular as a media, format, radio stopped being, storytelling platform. Radio was formatized. It was more focused on being, music playlist, and there were very few talking formats on popular radio stations, and people just forget about consuming that kind of content. Audiobooks were never big here, so speaking format without the image was never too big. What happened was that for Serbia, especially, Galeb started recording his podcast. It brought many people due to his previous social capacity built in the past 20 years where he worked as a journalist, and I would also say, a hero of one generation as well. So it brought the light to the format as well, but still, most of the people were still consuming podcast and still are consuming podcast as a video format. What is the other issue with this thing is that it's really hard to explain to the potential advertisers that you can brand audio content in a very good way. The thing they see is if their logo is not visible, if their product is not visible on the screen during the conversation, it's not relevant to them, it's not interesting to them. So that's one of the reasons why almost all successful podcasts have their video component as well. Why is that a problem? Because the idea behind the podcast, why podcast is such an interesting format and such a high potential format, is due to the fact that the entering barrier is quite low. The only thing you need is basically two microphones or lavalier bugs or whatever, and you can record a conversation in any room, more or less. The moment you introduce video, things start to get more and more complicated, take more time, more resources, more people required, and it's not something that can be done just as a hobby or for in your spare time. It does require at least one more person and their spare time as well, and that's tough. That's tough. And also what's tough is the fact that it takes time, unless it's connected to a previously well-known brand, like is the case with the news and what Yelisaveta and the guys are doing. News has been around for more than 10 years prior to the fact they decided to start a podcast. It was well known and well recognized brand. It's a very good way of piggybacking on a brand you developed. But if you don't have that, picking up and creating the initial community that can sustain you and make you, let's say, of course, sustainable, but also that can help you decide whether what you're doing makes sense, because it does require you to invest some serious time. It's usually between 6 months and 1 year. If it's a weekly podcast, it means that you have to record at least 30, 40, 50 episodes to start getting some sort of meaningful result. And that's a lot of time, that's a lot of effort. It's tough for many people to keep on going for so long. If we look at the stats, usually people decide to drop the podcast roughly at about 7th or 8th episode, and you need to go at least to 30, 40, 50 to get some sort of a larger community or some sort of a recognition. If you are working on a topic that's not widely popular or interesting, or if you are working on a topic where you have a lot of competition, it gets even harder than that. So the format itself is interesting because it's fairly easy to set up and start. It has its tough sides because it's tough to keep on going, because it's not it's not linear that it will gather the community fast. if you don't have video component, it's tough for people to figure out that you actually exist. If you have video component, there are many other ways you can do. You can use Reels, Shorts, TikTok, and people are gonna figure out that you are there. But if you don't have these things, it will take a lot of time until you actually have some visible and meaningful result. So that's roughly that. If we are speaking about audience, not sure about all the other countries, but in Serbia, when we did some, let's say, unofficial and small scale research, I think that we are roughly speaking about between 50 and 60,000 people listening to podcasts on a regular basis. Stats show higher numbers. Stats also teach us that people lie a lot because it's cool to say you listen to podcasts because it's a cool new format. But if we look at the numbers, numbers say that on average, it's that amount of people on a, let's say, weekly basis active in that space.
Thank you for this introduction, Ivan. Jakub, I wanted to ask you, I mean, we heard that the legacy or the tradition of podcasting here is not very long. What is the situation in Central Europe, or what are the trends? Is it different? How many media organizations are podcasting? How successful are they? And are maybe some struggles and challenges the same or different? Can we hear a short summary?
Well, I have the second couple of thoughts and maybe build on what Ivan was saying. So first of all, podcasting is a game for people who are consistent and who like to play the long game. So for those who listen to us, if you consider yourself such a person, that there's definitely a treat here, because the fact is that, as Ivan was saying, I mean, the data shows 90% podcast doesn't make it more than 10 episodes. And it's the blessing and the curse of how easy it is to start your own podcast. With a couple €100, you can buy an equipment which will basically get you a very professional sound. So, and you don't have to be a beautiful person. So you don't have those angles, So, or if you're, unfamiliar with camera, I mean, how many times I have recorded podcasts, being unfit visually to go outside. Only I can tell you, and that's actually very nice. Whereas, when you want to do video and so on, it's always slightly more complicated, for people, much more complicated. I also disagree that podcasts are very popular. I think podcasts are popular among journalists and, let's say, those people who constantly try to find something new. And it's like it became a buzzword a couple of years ago as something which may save some media. And there is, at least in Poland, I can tell that there's a couple, let's say, I would group, let's say, podcast creators into a couple categories. One is legacy media. Basically, who experiment a lot, who already have a huge traffic, and at least 2 or 3 biggest digital media outlets in Poland, they have their own audio platforms where they basically ask their journalists to do simple shows, which is sit and talk various topics, so from one studio, they are able to produce basically a lot of content, which from the cost perspective doesn't cost them much. It's very easy for them to easily reach the audience who is interested in it because they already have an enormous traffic and they just basically push it this way. The second group is actually podcasters. And when I say podcaster, I mean people who do not identify themselves with any other existing group on the market, not reporters, not journalists, and so on. Mostly people who actually came out of blogging/influencing, depending when they started. So in many cases, podcasters 10 years ago had blogs, 5 years ago, YouTube channels. Now, a lot of them added just a podcast component to it. And actually, we have a lot of cases where there's, I would say, a lot of popular people doing it. And the third group is, I would say, it's like non-profit media, some smaller media who basically are going into podcasting and so on. When it comes to categories which are super popular, I think globally, criminal podcasts are #1 thing on every market. Depending, no matter how big is the market, usually the criminal podcasts are super popular. It's usually good storytelling. It's hard to leave. Unsolved crime. It's something which actually kind of fascinates me, but this is something what we really want to hear, why this exactly form is so much on an audio and so on. So, but just to give you some numbers, I think in Poland we have between 500 to 800 active podcasts, which are truly active. That means probably there is 10 to 30,000 dead. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that in order to reach top 100 on Spotify, you need between 10 to 15,000 listens a week. And I say combined listens. It doesn't have to be per episode. You may have evergreen episodes. You may be doing more. I'm talking from a weekly podcast perspective. So that's the first thing. We have seen, of course, a huge bump in pandemic, which has been a blessing for basically podcasting industry, I think, on many markets. And that's basically where many podcasts took off. I would also say that probably around 70% of overall podcast listens is generated by 50 podcasts. That this market is very unfair. And that is mostly because the whole podcast discovery, to add to what Ivan was saying, is basically fucked. It's YouTube algorithm, TikTok algorithm, they work in a way that if your content is likable by people, the platform will help you to get more popular because they know that basically people will spend more on that platform. So whereas Spotify or any other like Apple, whatever, Google, I mean, Google doesn't like it's Google Podcast is inexistent. So just to give you an overview, in Poland, it's Spotify, YouTube is the second podcast platform. Then it's Apple, and then it's other. That usually means some Android apps. So the Android apps and whatever, they give you around 10% of listens. Apple is between 8 to 15%. YouTube 30%, Spotify is, in my podcast, is 48%. So half of my listens comes from just one platform. Just thinking what others number I can give you here, so to make it more meaningful. So and there was recently research published that there is globally less podcasts being created because simply the market is being more saturated. I don't think that this is a form which is preferable by many people in general. I know it's kind of like competing with radio and so on, but just so you know, radio only had a couple of, let's say, peak hours, which was directly connected to commuting. I would say for me, podcasts are in between radio and audiobooks. A lot of people who is into audiobooks, they love podcasts because this is the form they prefer. I don't know, they have maybe jobs, time, they just like it this way. And then of course different countries, the different perspectives. For example, so before the war, the podcasting market was slowly growing in Ukraine, but for example, Apple Podcast was a strong platform there. Czechia and Slovakia, they also experiment a lot there. But as I said, it's still podcasting it's still, I think we have to explain what are podcasts. We still need like the PR4 category. A lot of people basically doesn't carry around headset, stuff like this. It's very simple. In order from how to put it, why YouTube is such a popular podcast platform, it's because, it's so easy to open a tab, go to YouTube, find it. You don't need anything else. You don't need a special app, Spotify is great for podcasting, but you still need to pre-install this app in order to access podcasts. For example, in my podcast, we get like 5% listens on our website. So basically, that means that this website is purely like a business card of the podcast. If you go to Google and you look for Outsiders Podcast, this is a place where people go to find the link to the platform which they use to find the podcast. That's like intermediary, basically intermediary speaking. So thinking about trends, I think we are going to I think that at least the market in Poland will be more pushing for quality, and there is still some categories where we'll see a lot of experimentation. I also think, it's simply we are fighting for a very small group. And when Ivan mentioned data from Serbia, it's like basically, one medium-sized city which is listening to podcasts. So, and those people are already, in my opinion, podcast listeners are actually very hardcore users in terms of like once you listen to podcasts, you listen to many podcasts or go through them quickly. So frankly speaking, those people are already saturated, you know, they like my podcast is in the category global affairs. Before the war, there was 3 podcasts in this category. After the beginning of the Russian invasion, top 30 out of 100 podcasts are somehow connected to global affairs. So the competition is super fucking high, you know, and like this is like a new national sport in Poland. Everyone is a geopolitical expert. So which you can imagine the quality of our Twitter conversations only. So I'm gonna finish here. I'm curious to hear what is Yelisaveta has to say also.
Thanks a lot for this. And before I jump to Yelisaveta, I just wanted to comment because you mentioned that criminal podcasts are popular everywhere. Well, here, not still. We don't have a lot of podcasts on that topic, actually. I think it's because of the high cost of production, or I'm imagining because of that, but we still haven't seen a lot of those. But maybe, who knows, maybe they will come. Yelisaveta, news, as even mentioned a bit, news has already had a huge following before you started a podcast or podcasts. What was the decision behind starting it? Was monetization part of it, part of the reason?
Well, I would like to say yes, but in the end, I think that it was not, because the main idea was to, we are the authors of the really popular TV show called 24 Minutes with Zoran Kesic. And the idea was to break the silence in the periods where the show isn't going on a TV, in the summer and in the winter time. And first 3 podcasts were filmed in our old studio with Zoran Kesic and the guys. But as was previously mentioned, the main thing in this topic is to be consistent, and we couldn't be consistent with that kind of a team for a podcast. And also because we thought that it wouldn't be so interesting to have Zoran on TV every day, every week, and also every week on YouTube. So after a few months later, we decided to make another well, the same podcast, but another arrangement. So we had our originally Newsnet team, the guys and myself, and we started to have like a weekly update on the mainly political topics. And it was okay, but we still didn't have that consistency that people are seeking for. And only after we had a project with the Thomas Foundation, where we worked along with Jernej, we started to look at this more as a business and not so just like doing it for fun. We started it as a fun, but eventually we had to get serious and to be more productive. So I think from April 2021 we started podcasts every week, and soon after that we were seeing some results. In terms of views, of course, mainly, but not in terms of monetization. We had opened our Patreon a few years ago, but we were just like, okay, we are having Patreon. You like us, give us money, and that's not like how that works. So when we created new structure and a new plan for the podcasts, we also had one special video for our patrons, and that also gave really quickly the results. So in combination with Patreon and incomes from the projects, we could survive like few months, and we still couldn't manage to monetize it from the sponsors or the YouTube. We started gaining okay money from YouTube only few months ago. I mean, like 2 or 3, and we are doing this from 2021. So it is hard to gain money at once from the YouTube if you are not having such a political content as we do. There are much more chances to gain some sponsorships from commercial partners. In our case, that was obstacle as well, because in Serbia, as you probably all know, there are many media censorship things going on. So one of those censorship are financial. So nobody had the courage to say, okay, we are supporting Newsnet podcast, although we always said, okay, we will talk about your product or your brand in the beginning, and we will not talk about Vucic and the crew while we are consuming your product or something like that. So it was really difficult in the beginning. I personally believe that if we get big numbers, that we will not be so easy to say no. When you are small, everybody will say, okay, we don't have money, blah blah blah. But if you're a big podcast and you are in like top, I don't know, 3 or 5 in the country, then one day they will have to say yes. And I think that time is coming now. And I'm really glad that we were so consistent, and I don't know, that we took time to wait and to get what we have now.
And how does that look like now, your monetization for your podcast? You have sponsors, how does it work?
Yeah, we have sponsors, we have Patreon, and we have monetization from the YouTube. So, and we also have some of the projects, but they are not covering the whole podcast. So our for now we have like 3 pillars, and the main pillar, or I will not say main. I think they are pretty much there, like equal, and I'm okay with that, because we don't rely just on one, and if that one goes away, we can all die. So no, we are having like those 3, and every one of it is growing. So it's okay for now.
And thank you. And Jakub, regarding diversification of revenue and monetization strategies, your podcasts are in a short format, and they are audio formats exclusively, if I'm not mistaken.
So just to give you an overview, so as Outriders, first of all, you produce a very popular newsletter, a magazine, which is sent weekly. Second, in podcast, which we only produce for a year. Third, we have like a bunch of interactive projects which we do with bigger partners. And fourth, we just recently went into short video and video on YouTube. Just to give you an overview of those things. Now, our business model consists of 3 things, which is one is basically, let's say, regular support from the community through Patronite, which is like a Polish, basically Patreon. Second thing is grants, and the third thing is some kind of deals and sponsorships. So podcast is among those, but when we were creating it, it was mostly to actually have better connection with community and hopefully actually grow mostly the membership part of it. So that was basically how it was intended when it comes to creation. Now, our podcast, well, it's a podcast about global affairs, which was launched on the day 3 of the Russian invasion. So for the first 2 months, we've only covered what was going on in Ukraine. And it had wonderful statistics. But as audience was less and less into following the war basically hour per hour. We have also, I mean, that was a huge downside, you know, starting so big and being unable to keep it up, very bad for my personal morale, you know, which is like, I look at the statistics and I have this like, you know, Burj Khalifa here and then just regular, regular stuff here. So, but it allowed us to immediately build still a huge following. Right now we produce an episode weekly. It's around 30 to 40 minutes, but we also have special episodes, which I think the longest one, but they are like different format. It's usually highly narrative report, and they go up to 90 minutes.
Mhm. And for maybe small media outlets that are listening to this, or niche media outlets that are thinking about starting some video format or podcast, do you think there's value in starting it without monetization, as you mentioned? So it's not only, in your case, it wasn't actually about monetization, it was maybe about audience building, community building, and engagement. How
Well,
do
it
you
really depends. So first of all, if the question number one is, do you already have audience? Whatever, whenever, whether it's TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, or so, do you have someone who you can ask, hey guys, would you listen to a podcast, and see what is the reaction? Because that means that, you know, you have some initial people to at least try to take them there. The second thing is, I mean, how much time it will take, you know? So once you start to develop a podcast, you have to take into consideration how regular it's going to be, what kind of time commitment you will need it from you. Is it something what you already do? Like, I don't know, you are like an expert on Serbia. So for you, it's just basically you talk about it anyhow 8 hours a day. So just you put a microphone next to yourself for half an hour. You don't have to prepare much, you know, it's very natural for you. So here, actually, the entry level can be very low in terms of like this. The question is, you know, I mean, you still need to say to yourself something like, okay, 1,000 people listening per episode. For me, spending half an hour on recording and then, you know, paying some person very slow money to just, I don't know, do the audio file for you, maybe actually something valuable, you know, because one thing which is, I think, very important to emphasize that even if you have a small audience on podcast, that audience is very fucking loyal and develops a good relationship with you. So I would really think of podcast regular listens as your really hardcore people who follow you. And that's something worth considering if you really are into having community, not understood in a bullshit way, but, you know, a group of people with whom you somehow engage, want to engage, listen to them, not only like give them something to listen, but maybe engage them on the episodes, you know, ask them, I don't know, transfer them somewhere and so on. I think, you know, from couple thousand listens per episode, you can start to do some meaningful work with such people. So at the end of the day, it's just basically finding proper balance between quality, quantity, and what kind of form do you want to have. Now, adding a video component to it is, I think, right now the only way to somehow quickly promote your podcast. I say somehow quickly, but we are again not talking about overnight success. You know, in general, in media, in podcasts, I would say you gotta give yourself a year. First of all, some other people will lose consistency on the way. So, you know, you may not be the best. I mean, being the best is a combination of many things. You know, it's just not about the output of your audio file in the end. We as Ipsit here, we can produce New York Times quality story. The thing is, can we do it on a weekly thing? You know, it doesn't matter that me and Ivan and Yelisaveta hook up for, you know, a couple days, do a great episode, you know, don't sleep, spend all the money. We can do it. The thing is to find something which will not kill us, burn us out, and we can deliver this. Because the podcast audience, they like predictability, unfortunately. And that's, you know, it's, you gotta be on time, you gotta be same, like, you know, when they start to listen, they want to understand what's going on. I am not good at it. I love to experiment. My audience tells me stop. So that's basically where I am with it, you know. So, but yeah, I mean, if I would, I think all three of us agree that if you plan to experiment, not do less than 30 episodes, don't do it. It's just not worth your time. It's like 99% that you will fail, you know, unless you are like a super charismatic person, an undiscovered gem of audio industry, and you will pick off immediately. No fucking way it's gonna happen otherwise.
A good couple of advices and tips. Even, do you agree with everything that was said so far? And can you talk to us a bit about your personal journey with monetization of your content, but also your experience with working with smaller media organizations in the region?
Yeah. So I agree with all the things. One of the ways you can see that our podcast market is still in a very early stage is the fact that of all the types of podcasts that are available, we basically have only interview podcasts and maybe, let's say, roundtable. Something what news people are doing is roughly a roundtable concept. We don't have any other form which would be more related to, let's say, authorship or dramatization or stuff like that, which does require a lot of time and effort, because we can easily sit together and talk about something, whether it's a topic or a person and their life. It's quite easy. You don't have to prepare too much. If you're if you want to be a good journalist, of course you do your research and you do prepare. But if you're recording your podcast with friends, you just sit down and get it over with. uh, so we don't have any of these, let's say, advanced formats. Why don't we have them? Well, because they do require more time and energy. And if it requires more time and energy, it has to be, there has to be a way to make it commercial. There has to be a way to make it sustainable in the long run, and that's kind of tough. Um, I started with the podcast more than 4 years ago. It was one of the first active podcasts on the market. I have a couple of friends that did it before me. I had a couple of friends who did it before but dropped it along the way. Um, my idea from the beginning was build it and they will come. I did it because I liked listening to podcasts and I wanted to hear these stories, and no one was doing these stories, at least not in a way that was appropriate or interesting to me. Now we have a ton of personal growth, entrepreneurship, business podcasts, but still, I don't see anyone doing it the way I would want to hear these stories. So this is the reason why I'm doing it. From the beginning, I didn't believe that it can be easily sustainable in the long run, especially since I'm not actually a person who likes to make many compromises about the things that mean a lot to me, and this is one of the things that means a lot to me. Uh, so that's kind of tough approach if you want to make something commercially sustainable. But the good thing with the podcast, same with blogs before, is the fact that it's a really nice platform to showcase who you are, how you do things, how you approach things, and it's almost like your online portfolio. It's also good for network building and connection building, of course, but um, I got a lot of work for my consulting business through podcast because people liked my approach. I never actually advertised any of these things that I do during the podcast, but the way I speak with people tells the audience that I know a thing or two about the subject we're discussing. Then they Google it, then they figure out that I also do consulting. So in that way, it's interesting. It also helped me reach people I was not able to reach previously because I didn't have any kind of direct connection with them. Now I had a connection through maybe one or two hops, and after 4 years and 210 plus episodes, uh, almost every time I reach a person I want to have on my show, they say that they are delighted. They say they only heard good things. Most of them have usually watched, some of them have listened to some of the episodes. So it's in my personal experience and opinion, it has been good for establishing, let's say, a personal brand, or establishing a more visible position in this particular market I focus on. When I started, it was a fairly unknown format. I started with video as well because we have a studio and we have equipment and everything, and it was fairly easy for me to do these things. I knew from the beginning that many people will focus on video. It will be easy to find because it's a place where YouTube is a place where everyone is feeling like they're native there. So it's fairly easy. It's easy to play it on your television or your phone or whatever, and it will come more naturally to people. But I tried from the beginning, and I didn't stop with that even now, uh, to explain to the guests and audience that there's a very good reason why we don't have any visual props, why guests can't bring pictures and talk about them. It has to be as good for people listening as it is for the people watching. To be perfectly honest, as Jakub said, uh, I am not the most visually pleasant person in the world. If you want to watch someone who is really good looking, you would probably pick a different podcast for that. So my idea was never to make it complex in terms of video production, but to have that component as well. When we started, and even now, the way it looks, it's really basic, dark background, one source of light. We sit at the high table and high chairs and we talk, and that's it. There are no visual distractions for guests, but also for the viewers as well. It turns out that it's a fairly good decision for I don't know, for the audience. Many people have their own opinions that every podcast should look like it's the nicest living room in the world. Not my cup of tea. I don't watch podcasts, I listen to them, but it turned out to be a really good thing for guests because there are no distractions. They don't feel like they are in the studio. They don't have big light sources and 10 people looking at them and something is happening in the back all the time. No, it's quite intimate. And for my kind of podcast, that's a pretty big deal, and that allows us to have a deeper connection, which is the reason why I never had remote podcasts with guests. We have to be in the same space. We have to be close to each other. We have to, we have to make an atmosphere that after 15 minutes they're gonna forget that they're being on a podcast, and then we talk, and then they tell things that they have never told anyone. And when we finish it, we are both satisfied, and I would also say we are both empty in terms of what we want to give to the audience. So that's kind of a big deal for me. Working with media outlets, I was part of a couple of pioneering projects in that field, working with some local sports cable channels. For them, it was an interesting opportunity to get more content for social media, to get more content for their websites and stuff like that. They started a couple of years ago. They had good results, and they were quite. It was quite easy for them to sell that to potential advertisers because they had high-profile commentators. They are discussing football or basketball games that just happened, so they are quite in the moment, and they already have quite big following on social media. This is a way to engage them more into a conversation. What they mostly did was focus on live streamed podcasts. Uh, so it was a success for them, but after a while they figured out that it's too distractive and that they don't have internal resources to coordinate these things. And if they don't coordinate them properly, then the quality of content varies a lot, and that's not really good for the potential audience. The podcast audience really likes predictability in terms of time, in terms of what they can expect to get, and that is why they are so I would easily say addicted to the content they like. They spend a lot of time. Most of them who start listening to an episode listen to the full episode. There are very few cases where in audio distribution you have people who are listening to just a couple of minutes of something or whatever. In many cases, in almost 80% of cases, they listen to the full episode. While in video, it's much different. Many more people just drop along the way or figure out, get distracted or whatever. For other media outlets, it turned out to be an interesting option to add multimedia content, which most of the traditional media outlets lacked. Recording dynamic, interesting field video is nice, but for that you need to have a team or a redundancy of a couple of teams working on that, which is kind of hard to find, expensive, complicated. This, you have fixed setup and you can record something interesting pretty much every day. You can also rent it. You can also have outside people coming in, producing something for you. So it was an interesting option. Not many of these things have turned out to be successful. Media outlets prefer to get success in a matter of first 6 months. If they don't get enough traction, they simply kill the format, which happened in many cases. Some of these authors decided to continue on their own, which is nice for them and for their audience. But I would say that there is no major success for Serbian media outlets in terms of organized podcast production. Mondo was an interesting case, but if we take a look of what they did in the past couple of years, I think maybe 1 or 2 podcasts survived all that time. Most of them just got 1 season or even less than that. They decided to go in a different format with something that's more of a talk show than just a proper podcast. So decided to open a little bit more to a different formats and different audience. I do believe that podcast is a format for grown-ups, and grown-ups are not the most massive audience on the internet now. So that's kind of what I wanted to say.
And you mentioned something along the way when you talked about not being able to make compromises when you do something you care about. And this reminded me this made me think of Newsnet, and actually ask Yelisaveta, how do you balance between creating content that is engaging for the audience, but also suitable for monetization? And is this on your mind at all when creating content?
Well, to be sincere, no. We wanted to create something that we are proud of, to speak about the subject that we think that are really important for the society. And if that kind of content could be monetized and could have an audience, then great. We didn't want to compromise on that, and we really believe that we have a thing because it's different from the other things on the market. But also, I was really persistent in the seeking for the sponsorships, pretty much commercial sponsorships. So yeah, in terms of content, we didn't compromise at all. We wanted to have those things no matter what. And because of that, we created some new content in order to be safe if things in Serbia got worse, to have some kind of a safe net. So after a year and a half, when we saw that we gained some audience and big numbers in views, we wanted to spread a bit more and create something that will gain us more people and more views, but also new opportunity for sponsorships. So we created a podcast that's like a new format in which we are talking about series, films, theater plays, books, music, and stuff like that. And people were thrilled about that, but as we expected, but the sponsors came right after the first one. So it was really funny because some manager of one brand asked us, can you be funny although you're not talking about politics? And we're like, well, we can try. And yeah, we were funny still. So now we are having, we had a pilot period for like 4 months. We had only once a month, but now from March we are having two podcasts a month. So the idea is to have that kind of a sister podcast, podcast if a brother is in danger to feed him. That's the simply as I can put it. But although we created something new and more commercial, we still didn't compromise on content. We are still having our values and our core beliefs. We are just speaking about something else that we also like. We are not doing that just to do it. We are really in love with this new baby, and but we don't forget to have this main one, the podcast that is going every week, and which we think that's really important today. Because of the media censorship, but also because young people are mainly saying that they are not political and they are not interested in politics, but we are seeing from our audience and statistics that they are interested in this kind of content. Just they needed a new form, not like a regular news on a TV or some talk show on TV, but this kind of form is something that they can follow and they can have information from it. And I think that is really important today. So we are definitely going to do this in the future as well.
Thank you. And I know that you and Jakub need to leave us very soon. And I know that it's 5 o'clock, but I wanted to just kind of wrap up, even though we kind of just started talking about it. We could talk about it for hours, I think. But for those who are maybe listening to us and are from smaller newsrooms and thinking about doing podcasts, what would be kind of your first advice and tip for them? What to focus on? Should they start doing it at all? Should they start if they're not willing to commit? What would be kind of your first advice that comes to mind?
Jakub or me?
Both of you, you can start.
Okay, I can say, well, first of all, if they won't commit, then they shouldn't start. Second, I think that they should really analyze the market in their city to see what kind of content is something that is needed. Also, I think that they can really rely on community, because I think that Daško and Mlađa are a really good example of that kind of strength that the community can give you, because they started from from the zero, and they said, okay, if you want to have this kind of content and you want to listen to us every day, then you can support us on Patreon, and if we gain that kind much of money, we will do that every day. So use community, as Jakub said. Everyone has some kind of Facebook, Twitter, I don't know, TikTok, Instagram, whatever, and then start from there. I think that that could be a good example from the small media outlets.
Thank you, Jakub. What would you maybe say are some common mistakes you see newsrooms make and when trying to?
Common mistakes are not doing your homework at start, which is basically analyzing competition, maybe talking to them. Usually a lot of those people are good people and they are willing to talk to you. It's not like they just want to, kill you because you are going to do a podcast in their I don't know, niche. And the second thing is, if you have the community, talk to them, which is like, try to think, whether you are trying to what kind of problem you are solving to them, like ask them a simple question. What do I have to do so you will listen to me 30 minutes a week, and then those two things, because still in every country, podcast market is already somehow developed. So it's not like, 10 years ago or whatever, when there was like, Wild West, when Ivan was starting, so he could do anything he wanted, basically. So right now it's somehow formatted market. So that means the data is there. And you don't have to rely just on your creativity or just luck,
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And even anything you would like to add for the conclusion and summary of this short conversation?
Manage your expectations. Don't go too high with your expectations. Don't start if you have less than 50 episodes in you, whether it's 50 guests or 50 topics or whatever, but have a list and update that list every day. Every time you record an episode or a guest, add another one, and always have enough to come on. Plan properly, pre-record. If you decide to go on a weekly dynamics, which is what I would definitely suggest, don't start with one episode recorded. Have if it's possible, if it's not something that's related to the events happening in the past day or two, have some pre-recorded, has some buffer. But if you decide to go, don't stop until at least 1 year has passed.
Thank you. Thank you all. Thanks to our audiences for listening. I hope we will maybe continue this conversation maybe in another format. But thank you for sharing your insights and your experience, and see you next time.
Bye.
Bye.